Hello and welcome to the FMCC webinar, the Facility Manager's Guide to Information Technology, Second Edition Best Practices, presented by Ted Ritter and Geoff Williams. Next slide, please. I do want to let everyone know they have been muted for audio quality, and this webinar is being recorded and will be later posted to the FMCC website. If you have any questions during this webinar, please feel free and type them into the question box on your control panel, and we'll review them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. Also on your control panel, you can download a PDF copy of this PowerPoint. Next slide, please. And here you can see the vision and mission statement of the FMCC. Next slide, please. The FMCC provides many services to the FM community, such as Ask the Expert, Find a Consultant, Locate a Speaker, and online educational resources. You may find more information at their website, fmcc.ifma.org. And as always, we like to thank our sponsors. Next slide. And what's bringing us all together today, and actually for the rest of the week, is World FM Day, which we have now kind of stretched into World FM Week. Next slide. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And we have put together a great program of over 30 sessions, started yesterday evening and going through Thursday, as I said. Next slide. And here's just a screenshot of some of our presenters that you'll be having the pleasure of listening to throughout the week. Next slide. Okay, and at this time, it's my pleasure to go ahead and turn this over to Ted Ritter and Geoff Williams. Ted?
Thanks, Josh, and thanks for everybody for joining us today. I'm the current president and SAG leader of the IFMA technology community. I'm also current vice president of the FMCC, so I've got a couple hats on. I'm looking forward to doing this presentation, sharing the knowledge with you. And Geoff, you want to say a few things about yourself, and we'll get this going.
Sure. So as Ted starts putting extra hats on, I've started taking hats off. I've been actively involved with IFMA. I'm just past being on IFMA's board of directors. I am a SAG leader with the technology community, where I've been since 2002, and past Toronto chapter leader. And I'm joining you for World FM Day from Facility Fusion in Toronto today. Welcome, everybody. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we want to make sure of, if you haven't heard it before, is that there is a high value in councils and communities within IFMA. And about a year and a bit ago, there was some rationalization that occurred to look at councils as vertical markets and look at the opportunities that they provided. So if you work in airports or banking or corporate facilities, there is a council for you that is there to support you globally. And if you have a question related to those things, that group of people is there to answer, including Facility Consultants Council. The other thing that happened is that there were a number of communities, and the idea was to start to normalize the communities to be horizontal markets that look at supporting the membership at large with content and value creation. And so Ted and I are both SAG leaders for the information technology community, and we've been working at developing content, presentations, a textbook, and a presentation like the one today on the textbook for yourselves. Next slide, please. So we're really looking at the global mindset of information technology within IFMA, and we do a lot of different things, but we do bring a great group of people, thought leaders, committee members, and we really take a lot of pride in what we do, and really we're well supported by IFMA staff. Jacqueline Lee is our council liaison, and then Mary Ressler is the director of membership. So next slide, please. When we're talking about our session today, we've aligned ourselves, the information technology community, with the CAFAM working group in GEFMA, which is part of the German Facility Management Association. And so one of the things that we've looked at is how can we make alignments strategically with other areas around the globe. And so GEFMA has a very strong passion for FM, and a little bit different. They have company members rather than individual members, different from IFMA. But they have a representation not just in Germany, but in other Germanic countries as well. And they focus on standardization, guidelines, best practices, and then they have events. I attended an event that they put on in Frankfurt in February, which was excellent. InServe FM was the name of it. Next slide, please. As a subset to GEFMA, and similar to the information technology community, they have what they call their ITFM and or CAFAM working group. And really what they're looking at is elaborating on all of the different elements where computer-aided and automation impacts facility management. And so that's the group that we've been working most closely as we've developed the textbook that we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about some of the things that we will leverage from the textbook, and then also talk about sort of current FM technology and how to start to look at life cycle and ROI. Next slide, please. And so a lot of what we're talking about today, if not all of it, is available in the second edition of the Facility Manager's Guide to Information Technology. The first edition was launched in 2012, and we were really quite proud of it. And the second edition, we've done a lot to overhaul it. And in broad brushstrokes, we've added about 200 pages of content. We'll talk in detail as we get into the slides. We launched the hard copy, which is available at Amazon, or if you're looking for bulk purchases, we can give you a coupon code and do that directly from our website. And we will be launching a Kindle version in June of this year. Coupon code is there. Okay, so one of the things that we came up with when we were looking at this is why an FMIT textbook? And really what we came down to is because it is intrinsic to the work that we're doing as FMs. There's almost nothing that we do that isn't impacted by technology. And there are technologies that are really starting to lead the way in how we operate our businesses and buildings. Next. So in 2008, we sort of had this first connection between ourselves and GEFMA, who had done this CAFAM handbook. And again, CAFAM is the term that they use for computer-aided facility management. It doesn't mean the sort of the North American vernacular that's very specific type of tool. It's anything that's automation related. And so we looked at doing a direct translation of their book, and then added a lot of content that made it North American relevant and English relevant around the world. And then so as we got to the end of that, we launched that in 2012. The end of 2012, we had the Facility Manager's Guide to Information Technology, and it was an excellent text, and it still is, but we are on to bigger and better things next. And so in 2015, we started talking about what we were going to include in the second edition. Next. And then we did our first sort of launch at a conference just outside of Dallas in January 26th. And so from there, we've gone to, next, InServe FM in February, and then we went to Las Vegas in early April, and now we're in Toronto. Okay, so when we looked at the textbook, anything in gray more or less stayed the same. So some things related to technology don't change, and what you'll find is that those areas are either very basic from a how do things work from a technology perspective, or they're more business related. And so business decisions and how to define what you're looking for and define processes and select things, all of those are relatively, that won't change dramatically as the technology changes. Yes, technology changes fairly radically, and so when you get into the blue, those are areas where technology is moving at a fairly strong clip, and so we made some major revisions to those chapters. And then we also looked at adding things that really didn't exist, or if they did, they were kind of a bleeding edge element in the first text. And so we're talking, at the most we get into is leading edge in this book. We don't get into bleeding edge, so really what we're talking about are things that any FM should be able to work with now. And so we really want it to be a tool and a handbook for people to leverage information technology in FM. Next. The other thing that we did, and this gets into relevance as well, there are a wealth of case studies out there, and what we found is that as technology has changed, we want to make sure that we're supporting the those items with contemporary case studies. So really we only kept 2 case studies from the previous text, and both had fairly major revisions, but everything else was new. And as I said earlier, we've added about 200 pages, and a lot of that's come from the case studies. And so when you look at the other appendices, security for building control systems, that's a hot topic right now with the ransomware virus that went around this week. There's all sorts of issues around security in building networks and computer networks. And then we also started to look at building information technology, or building information modeling, which will be more fleshed out in our Kindle version. Next. So, we're 17 years into the millennium, and really a lot has changed. You can see all the things that have changed in a big way. So we've gone from, very expensive hardware and processing power to nearly unlimited and very inexpensive processing power in the cloud. Bandwidth speed. So all of a sudden, the internet is something that's viable as a network rather than as a sort of a browsing or a consumer type thing. We've got a lot more different options in what we do. Things like Google Maps and the ability to integrate GPS into apps and really make them come alive. Augmented reality is something that's leveraged against that. And then BIM, we've gone from sort of the early stages of BIM to, really good construction pilots to starting to get excellent facility management examples. And everything is becoming more intuitive. Ted and I did a presentation. Ted, you have the bag. Los Angeles 2013?
That's right. 2013
yeah.
in LA.
Right. So Ted keeps all of his bags. He's sort of like a bag lady. And what happened in 2013 is we started to see a change in interest in technology. We were always talking about technology roughly in the same terms as we're talking about today. But really what started to happen is people were less threatened by technology in the facility management world, and actually were looking to more embrace it. And so the level of engagement changed dramatically, and it's been on a steady upswing since then. And that's really because technology is more intuitive. It's not something that you need to be a programmer to understand what we're talking about. Next slide, please. So in Chapter 16, we do look at trends. And again, we're not looking at sort of bleeding edge trends. These are things that are actually happening now and are things that can be leveraged. So we look at cloud computing. And so cloud computing is anything from using Azure platform for servers to Office 365 to any other type of hosted application. But some organizations have a nervousness around cloud computing, so they may build a personal cloud, which is their own cloud in the data center that does all of the things that cloud does, but at a higher price point. Or they might start to look at a hybrid cloud where they use some of the public elements and some private elements based on what level of security they need. We're starting to see more and more virtualization. A lot of things are becoming no longer tangible, but really quite virtual world. And that's where we're starting to see augmented reality, artificial intelligence, big data, predictive analytics. We're getting all sorts of different things going on that that we're really quite excited about. Pardon me. Ted, is there a video to play?
Had some issue with that, so I think we're going to, it's kind of hard to do that interactively, so
Sure.
Let's get on to A Tale of Two Hospitals.
Okay, A Tale of Two Hospitals. So this is based on a case study that's in the textbook. And one of the things that I came across with in a past life is implementing FM technology from a change management perspective. And so the outcomes were wildly different. Two hospitals, same city, similar opportunities, similar deployments. But really what they were looking for was the ability to make accurate decisions. Both had poor document sets, poor sets of information, and sometimes conflicting, and sometimes in 3 different ways. There was a challenge in being able to collect information and disseminate it, and so, and again, information was king to making decisions, and they were not getting that information. They had depending on which hospital it was, one of them had a strong vertical transportation issue in that it was about 250,000 square feet across 13 stories. And so the staff were spending forever in the elevators or waiting for elevators, going back and forth to where their operating and maintenance manuals were, where their drawings were, and where the job site was. The other one had the same issue, but on a horizontal platform. They were faced with a lot of administration overhead, and they were looking to reduce that. And then they really wanted to improve their customer service level by being able to respond and fulfill needs of a hospital and make sure that the hospital is running correctly. Very similar needs parameters. Next slide, please. So, but they both chose a slightly different path. So Hospital 1 looked at it and said, okay, this is where we want to get to, but we know that trying to boil the ocean all at once is going to be complicated. So they defined manageable smaller implementation phases, and probably the first one you might have considered similar to a pilot. They included all of their staff, even at the planning stage, as user group demonstrations, and they incorporated a lot of the staff feedback into the solution. Not everything, but it was a real high engagement. So that it was one thing that started to help build anticipation of the implementation later on. Hospital number 2, they wanted to do everything from day one. So they basically looked at a turnkey solution with a single phase implementation, which is fine, except that they did not include their staff in the demonstrations. They did not help their staff understand what was being implemented. So it started to breed a little bit of suspicion, especially in a unionized environment, on what was happening. Next slide. Both selected an implementation partner, and it happened to be the same company. Both had the opportunity to interact, create interactions between the implementation partner and their staff. One chose it at all levels of staff. The other only chose it at the management level, which meant that the staff were largely unaware of what the implementation partner was doing. And the one that included the staff and everything really started to, we did a lot of implementation demonstrations. So as partial data was inside the system, there was an opportunity to show it off. And it continued to build that anticipation. Next slide. So you can probably imagine the results were that the first hospital, everyone was really excited about it. Training went really smoothly, and the value of the solution was realized really quickly. And so if you're looking at trying to calculate return on investment for one of these solutions, the speed at which it's adopted and adopted properly will really impact your return on investment. Conversely, And it's purely a change management thing. And you may remember early in the slide deck, I said that some of the things in the textbook were really left because they were business and management elements, and change management is one of those. Second hospital, it almost failed. It took nearly 2 years to actually, after implementation, to re-engage the staff so that that value could be realized. Staff were still suspicious and skeptical for that 2-year period, almost inclusively, and the training courses, as a result, were met with disinterest. So it required multiple training sessions. It required a lot of effort, both on the part of the implementation partner and on the part of the management team, to bring it up to speed. Again, very similar hospitals, same location, city-wise, very different results, and these things are very important to the business decisions that you make in implementing facility management technology. Ted.
Thank you, Geoff. That was fascinating. And Josh, just to make sure that if people have questions, they can type them into the chat box. We're happy to answer anything that anyone throws at us. Chapter highlights and case studies in IoT 101. Last week, just did a panel presentation to the IFMA Phoenix chapter with 3 of the authors of the book, 3 of the members of the technology community, and there's been a lot of focus on IoT, especially from an IFMA perspective. Since last October in San Diego, there was a decision by the board to form an IoT task force, which is very vital. There's members from, I think, 22 countries at this point. And I think to a certain extent, we have a little bit of a dichotomy in terms of what is IoT. From one perspective, we've been dealing with IoT for decades. I mean, we've had, building control systems at one level of sophistication or another. So that's certainly IoT. We've all evolved, I think, to have a smartphone, and that's another aspect of IoT, that we're always kind of connected, and our devices can even connect with each other, sometimes when we want them to, sometimes when we don't. IBM has invested billions, literally, in IoT and analytics. There's a new building that they've occupied in Munich, which is really decided to be, the best practice R&D facility in the world for IoT. It's everywhere. One of our other co-authors on the book and global director of facilities on semiconductor did a webinar for the tech community last month, and we were, I think my jaw hit the table when he said how many chips that ON Semiconductor produces every year. I think Jeff's guess was around 5 billion. The answer was 70. And they're not, as they put it, super cool chips. They're the everyday chips, but they're the everyday chips that are controlling your kitchen appliances and connecting your car and your TV and your phone. And they all have one thing in common: they're all attached sensors. So what we've seen is this huge proliferation, and it's not looking like it's slowing down at all. So, some observations. Are we living through the hype cycle? Is kind of the question. I think, the technology trigger, so to speak, that got this going was, quite frankly, the analytics to be able to make some sense of that amount of data. We've all heard the term big data, but when you're, talking about, just think about an airport, how many sensors they've got and how many action points there are during the course of a day. How do you make sense of it? So I think, perhaps the trigger point was partially due to the analytics tied to, some of the leading providers to be able to say, okay, we can start making sense about all this, what's going on, so it's not just white noise. And I think the other component of the technology trigger that really is putting us into, the current focus on IoT is the drastic reduction of the cost of chips. Last year I saw a demo at the IBM conference of a new chip that Texas Instruments had just started manufacturing, cost about $2, and you could pretty much put it anywhere in a about 1,000 square foot room, and it would measure 16 data points and automatically read it up to any device or any analytics tool set or cloud provider that you wanted. So we've seen a lot of, I think, influences that have gotten us to that top of that curve. Cost of the technology, the refinement of the analytical tools. And then I think we're also seeing, what are we doing with it? Are we at the peak of inflated expectations that this is going to change everything for the good? I, for example, got a newer car. It took me about 3 months to get used to it because it's got self-driving technology that's all based on sensors and chips that will keep me in lane and beep at me if I'm doing something silly. Are we at the trough of disillusionment yet? I don't know if we are. I think we're somewhere in the middle there, perhaps, that we're, dealing with a little bit of information overload on what do we do with this stuff? How does it make sense? How can we pull out of this sea of data useful information, even if it only may be usable, for about 5 minutes? There's still a lot of refinements. I think going back to the IBM conference this year in Las Vegas, they basically did a mini mock-up of IoT Watson Center from Munich, and they call it the playroom. And you get to go through the playroom and look at real-time examples of what people have done with IoT and analytics over the course of the last year. And I thought some of the examples were just fascinating. What FedEx is doing in their distribution centers and their shipping distribution just with conveyor belt systems is revolutionary for them. Looking at what Heathrow Airport and London is doing in terms of their lighting control systems and how they're blending their lighting control system into environmental controls I thought was also pretty fascinating. So I think, to a certain extent, we're not quite in the trough of disillusion, but I think to a certain extent we're also starting to see some advanced usage of IoT beyond just traditional building control systems where there's real business value. And so I think, we're kind of split between this, coming up on the slope of enlightenment versus, we're just dealing with information overload. But if you are interested, can certainly have Josh or either of us, point you to that IoT task force site, and happy to share some more information there. A lot of this comes down to what to track and why. Just because we can track it, should we? Going back to last week's panel presentation on IoT, I mean, what do we track? Why do we track it? Well, one of the presenters talked about, an agile workforce. We want to know if our workspaces are more touchdown spaces and more like a Starbucks and very, little dedicated seating space and more meeting rooms. How do we manage that? In other words, how do we manage the seat count? It's not even, for some perspectives, the desk count now, it's the seat count. It's, what does the occupancy look like? Should we be blending that with how our customers, how our facility occupants are feeling about their experience in the building from, first greet to when they leave the parking garage or exit the building? Quite possibly. I mean, we all like to know how we're doing, customer service-wise. Sure, we've always had traditional building control systems. We have a whole lot more choices now to extend those very affordably. Do we want to be able to, increase the number of zones so we can more specifically target variables in temperature and how we may want to adjust that? Do we want to look at submarine consumption and, Kimberly-Clark in the U.S., for example, is now delivering paper towel dispensers for bathrooms that basically, alert the facilities team when they're running low. And can very accurately, down to the sheet of recycled paper towel, say how much the usage actually is. So, lots of, use cases there. And then, looking at, condition, again, with the lowering cost of sensors, it's the ability to provide sensors and therefore feedback from mechanical systems, electrical systems, even our security systems is evolved exponentially. So, I think it's very much dependent to what kind of facility you might be in, what kind of population you have. Is it more office space? Is it mixed mode between distribution and admin? Is it retail? Is it a museum? Will all kind of depend what the priorities are. But the really key is to really map out what makes the most sense. I think, looking at is someone happy in a space? Can we, iconize, what we're doing at our facilities in an easy fashion to say, hey, we know somebody's kind of hot in this room and they're a little bit cranky about it, and they've given us some feedback, but the sensors are also telling us we are significantly above the set point norm for that higher temperature when we've got one person that might become unhappy. And we can take feedback both from the sensors that are telling you what's going on in the environment, but we can also take feedback directly from the facility occupants and blend that together to make a more informed decision, possibly more quickly. I think looking at combining the data and thinking about some of the case studies Geoff referenced in the tail end of the book, especially one of the airports specifically, had gone through a major innovation. They had utilized an advanced BIM model. They'd fed it into their CMMS enterprise asset management solution, and then really looked at, during the course of that project, what else should they bring in to those work centers, to those dashboards that the different operators responsible for different aspects of the facility were worried about. So, again, our computing power has gotten exponentially faster. The software behind the scenes that can manage analytics and, for want of a better term, connect the dots between, hey, we've got some cranky people here, wait a minute, it's creeping one way or the other in terms of temperature, and there also might be some feedback going on, and how are we doing our consumables, can all be brought together to really give very, very specific insights onto what's going on, what we should do as corrective actions, and what we may want to do programming-wise for the space based on specific occupant loads a little bit differently in the future. This stuff can be overwhelming. With the array of sensors and the array of equipment that we've all got to deal with, I think it really comes down to what makes the most sense. Is it simple to state what the needs are of the specific facility or organization? If we're going to roll this stuff out in any kind of logical format, are going to look at doing a pilot first, perhaps, and then scale it up, and we validated that the pilot will really support the full scale. Probably should have security in red and not diversity, as Geoff said. We just went through that ransomware attack. I'm not sure that was IoT based or not, but thinking back to last year at about the time of World Workplace in San Diego, was one of the largest denial of service hacks in history. And for a period of between 16 and 20 hours, accessing through Wi-Fi thermostats that were, hey, these are really cool, we can add thermostats and we can connect it via Wi-Fi to our control system. Took down 22 major sites for 16 to 22 hours. I'm not sure if you guys remember that, but Netflix and Spotify and other sites of that ilk with tens of millions of users were rendered inoperable because someone did not set the user ID and password effectively and correctly and securely on $80 Wi-Fi thermostat. So it's a very real instance. Had a lot of questions last week about that one. Is like, was that intentional? Was, what did it get? I don't think they really got anything. I think they proved the point. And then, the last piece is always keep the security in mind. We'll try not to be a broken record about that. Is, do we have the right network for this to operate on effectively? Putting, advanced generation sensors onto a slow network is not going to give you the results that you want. So, think about what, data elements you want to blend together You know, whether it's, you know, IBM or SAP or Oracle or Microsoft, you know, there's a lot of providers out there that have great analytic tools, and some of them are truly at the point of, you know, kind of fuzzy AI that they can actually start making decisions on your behalf, not executing on them, saying, hey, you might want to look at this, which is also kind of a blending point, a merging point between big data analytics and, you know, where that data is coming from, which is, quite frankly, IoT. So, you know, if you're really curious about how to do this securely, I'm not going to dwell on every single point on this slide, but this is kind of how to do it. You know, old school was, you know, there needs to be a DMZ. Well, new school is there needs to be a communication gateway that validates every single data point coming in before it hits your environment. And, you know, typically it's going to be, you know, that cloud layer in there. Haven't seen a lot of examples of closed systems, you know, running advanced IoT. Typically, you know, it's going to be a cloud layer in there, and then, you know, that two-level authentication before it actually gets to your application server is critical. So it can be secured, but just we keep seeing examples of organizations that, you know, need a little more education on one side of the other about what the implications are of, you know, adding that Wi-Fi thermostat, or, you know, what happens when you're provisioning a specific type of equipment, you know, into your facility. It could be something as innocuous as a multifunction copier, or in healthcare, it could be something like a medical gas device that's also got a link up to the cloud, so it can continuously update its BIOS. But if it's not done securely, there definitely are some risks. So, you know, no matter what systems you may have today in place, I mean, we've from the technology community perspective, you know, do an annual benchmarking study on how integrated workplace management systems are utilized between North America and Europe. You know, what we're seeing is they're adapting. The sheer volume of potential data that they're being asked to quantify to make usable for operators is changing. I kind of like this slide because it's, you know, I2 WMS, is, you know, really look at, you know, what you're going to be focused on. I mean, whether, you know, thinking back to the other diagram, you know, how do you orchestrate it? You know, and then how do you implement it is, I think, really kind of the point of this image is, so you've decided to, you know, push out, you know, occupancy sensors and some more CO2 sensors and temperature sensors, and you've established what your, you know, internal or external SLAs are. How do you then use that data very effectively, or most effectively, to deliver the services, you know, across real estate management, space and moves, hard asset management, service management, down to the catering level or porters, and then, you know, also look at, you know, think of that other spoke on the wheel. You know, can we enhance our sustainability management? I think the answers to that are absolutely yes. We're seeing some great examples of that, both in Europe and North America. Living on the edge, and I'm not sure this video is going to work either, but talk to it a little bit. If you've not heard of the building edge, I would definitely suggest that you Google the edge, and, you know, take a look at, you know, what they've done. On the one hand, it's billed as the most technologically advanced and the most sustainable building on the planet. That being said, is everything working perfectly? No, it's not, but it's sure going in the right direction. It's a truly remarkable feat of engineering, and I know they're still finding tuning some of the you know, systems in place, but it's you know, a near net zero energy consumption facility, which is astounding given its size and aspect, and it's also very interactive and is using some almost bleeding edge, but really more cutting edge at this point technologies. I mean, lighting systems on this one in and of itself is phenomenal on how it's working and how it's controlled. as well as the interactivity between the facility occupants, the building itself, and the service teams that keep it going. Would definitely like to open it up for any questions. We've got a little bit of time left, maybe 5 minutes or so of questions. Geoff, do you have any questions? Did I miss anything good?
Do I have any questions? I was going to make a comment. I thought I guessed higher than 5 billion chips, but you could be very right.
I seem to recall it was 5 billion. It might have been 7, but you were off by a factor of about 10, as was I, because I thought it was about 10, and it turned out to be 70.
That happens with me. Yeah, I mean, some of these things, I guess this is sort of, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but some of this stuff actually makes me a little bit nervous, and I don't know. You kind of used the example of your car earlier in the presentation. How comfortable are you with all of the decisions that the automation is going to make for you?
I've got comfortable that it's pretty reliable. I still don't 100% trust it. I've noticed that, if the front grille of the car, where there's quite a few sensors for, making sure don't park too close to the wall or something, when it's a little bit dirty, it doesn't work nearly as well. So I guess the concern level is it's a nice assist and it's a nice reminder, but I'm not going to completely trust it, because if the sensors are dirty, clogged, failing, then we're going to make very bad decisions on bad data, potentially. So I'm a little concerned about that. Yeah,
I get the same problem with the sensors in my car. Yeah, I think when I'm, as we start to get to sort of more and more artificial intelligence, it's going to be an algorithm making the decision about, maybe what the, if it avoids an accident, is it avoiding it based on sort of a net collateral damage? And then I'm worried that eventually I'm going to be more expendable than somebody else, kind of thing.
Again, it's a great assist, and I think we, from my perspective, just need to always look at, once we've extended all this, I'm thinking more of a practical or perhaps more normal example. I was working with one organization, about 1 million square feet. They made a decision after investing rather a large amount of money in a fairly advanced building control system that the chief engineer had this gut level feeling that everything wasn't quite right. So he put a process in place to do, for want of a better term, preventative maintenance on his building control system to figure out, are my sensors working as expected? And I think he's a lot more comfortable in trusting the data, knowing that he's validating that the sensors are calibrated correctly, working correctly. So he's not getting false positives, not getting inaccurate data, and not making decisions on falsehoods.
Yeah, and I guess that's the trick to it, is to make sure that you know your building best. And if there's something that doesn't seem right, there may be some truth to that. And trying to suss it out. Josh, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, we do. Going back to the case of the 2 hospitals, what specifically were the staff skeptical about in use case 2?
Well, so in the trade staff, it was primarily trade staff, and there was a suspicion that the automation was going to, for lack of better terms, start to make some of them obsolete. So it would improve the efficiencies so dramatically in the hospital that there would be fewer headcount at the end of it. I think that was the big thing. The reality of facilities business in general, healthcare in Canada for sure, is that there is more work to do than the amount of staff that are there. And so the idea is to try and make it so that they're able to accomplish the tasks that they need to, rather than deferring maintenance. But it was that was stressing them out. It was looked at as a threat.
Great, thank you. And another question we have is, how can technology help with questions like that, questions like what is the ROI of more technology and what is the ROI and risk of more technology?
Jeff, you want to go first? You want me to?
Well, I think that the one thing that we would, I'll start, Ted, and you can go. The one thing that we would say is that technology for technology's sake has no value. And so there is no ROI. And so, you know, if you're going out to buy the new iPhone 8 next week or whenever it comes out, that's not what we're here to advocate. What we're here to advocate in most cases is to look at your business processes, make sure that they are well defined and well documented, and then determine if there is an automation opportunity for those things. And if there is, then make sure that the technology is the appropriate technology for that. And then you'll get an ROI. There's no ROI on just adopting more technology. And I guess I wouldn't want technology to help you define your ROI other than maybe a spreadsheet calculation set. Ted?
You know, I definitely agree with that. I mean, technology for the sake of technology as it relates to, you know, facility management isn't the point. I mean, you know, what, as Jeff said, the business process, but, you know, how do I then take that required business process that I need to support and apply technology effectively to it? And then to the ROI question, I guess, you know, what we see more as a discussion is step back from the ROI for just a minute and look at what is the time to value. I mean, we all know that hardware and software, you know, evolves and becomes outdated, you know, periodically. So there's a life cycle management time, just the same as there would be for a chiller or a boiler. If you know, it's just typically faster. So what you know, if you've got a clearly defined business process and you know made a good concerted effort to select the right technology to help support it, whether it's a security system or a work order system or whatever it may be, once you've matched those two elements up, look at how can I collapse the implementation time? When can I start getting benefit from this? Because if you've got a faster time to value, then you've got potentially a much stronger ROI for the long term. Hopefully that helped.
Great, thank you. Those are the questions that I had.
Very good. Again, thanks everybody for joining us. Big thanks to FMCC for all the effort supporting World FM Day, and thanks Josh for hosting quite a number of these webinars during the week.
You're very welcome. Do we have another slide? I think I was going to announce our next webinar. Thank you. Is there one more after that? There we go. And the next one will be hosting will be Mike Petersky, Partnering for Excellence. Facility managers and industry partners collaborate to elevate the FM community. And then David Reynolds will be coming up with Operations and Maintenance and Health and Safety Collaboration in the 21st Century Workplace. So I look forward to hopefully seeing more people on those webinars. Next slide. And we will be having webinars going through Thursday. So certainly look at the schedule and pick out the ones that apply to you best. I do want to let everyone know that the FMCC does have an app, and you can download it at iTunes or Google Play. Next slide. And the FMCC STAG is always looking for volunteers, so if you are interested or you have an idea for a presentation or a white paper, etc., please contact Ricardo. He is the FMCC STAG chair, and he would love to hear from you. Next slide. There we go. Jeff, Ted, always great listening to you guys. Thank you for a great presentation. And everyone, I want to thank you very much for attending today's webinar. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye now.